Alright Borderlands 3 fans, what's up? In this video, I'm going to be covering an elemental themed build for Amara. The element this build focuses on is shock, and I've named this build Lady THOR Amara, as Amara gives her best impression of the Goddess of Thunder, utilizing all shock weapons, shield, grenade, and artifact. I've been wanting to make good elemental themed builds for a while now, and at this point in the game, we've got all the right gear to make it happen. So let's check out the gear and the skill tree to see how far we can take it. Let's start with the gear. Of course we're going with the Revolter shield here. This is the best shield you can get for shock damage in the game. Though there are other good options, like an old god with shock. The Revolter outdoes it with a much higher damage output, making you really feel like a Goddess of Thunder. For the grenade, I've got to go with the Recurring Hex, a shock variant of course, with ASE shock damage. Chucking a bunch of these at enemies looks like you're casting an electric cloud spell on the battlefield. Very fitting for an electric themed build. My artifact is the electric Banjo, and this is something you don't see very often, like at all. But for this elemental themed meme build, this artifact is a perfect fit. And while it's not the best artifact out there, it's not completely useless. I really want to use something different and unique for these builds. The electric Banjo gives you bonuses into electrocute chance, shock resistance, and shock damage. So you'll get some mileage out of this thing, and it seems to pair well with Amara's indiscriminate ability. Plus, it looks great, chaining even more electricity across the arena. And for the class mod, I'm using the Death's Blessing. Now ideally, you want as many points into Wrath and Remnant as you can get, both for the gun damage and for the Remnant orb that spawns from fallen enemies. This orb is powerful enough to vanquish the last 2 life bars of the Seer, a lot of the times in one hit if you do it right, meaning that oftentimes it'll one-shot regular enemies. Oh, and when you pick up a blessed orb from a kill, that adds another 150% damage to your weapons. Alright, now the skill tree before I get into the weapons. I'll start with the red tree because it's got most of the skills to fit the elemental theme. 5 points into Anima, 5 points into Infusion, 5 points into Tempest. These 3 will boost elemental damage, and Tempest further increases shock damage, which is amazing for this build. 3 points into Indiscriminate, 1 point into Forceful Expression, of course. And I know technically Illuminated Fist is a wasted point here, but it just doesn't feel right not using this on Amara, to me. But yeah, putting it in Wildfire, Catharsis, or Conflux are probably better options. For the blue tree, we're also going all the way to the bottom. And there's some important stuff here as well. 5 points into Violent Tapestry, 5 points into Restless and Wrath. We're getting Remnant points from our class mod, and that's more than enough, so we don't waste points there. And we grab Avatar so we can spam our action skill and keep up our Revolter proc. And then we've jumped the rest of the points into the purple and green trees. 5 points into Heavy Rain, 5 points for Arm Seal, and 3 points for Samsara. Now of course, I'm using the shock damage action skill element, which I guess is just called shock. But this is the Lady THOR Goddess of Thunder build here, so of course that's what we're going with. And I'm using Phase Slam as the action skill because I'm using quite a few weapons with the anointment that gives 300% weapon damage after using Phase Slam, which is the biggest weapon damage boost you can get on action skill end. Alright, so speaking of weapons, let's move on to that now. The Free Radical is easily the strongest weapon for this build, demolishing the toughest enemies with ease. This thing is perfect for this build, as it is elemental locked to shock damage, and it works exceptionally well with a lot of Amara's skills. It works great with Infusion, Tempest, Indiscriminate, and Forceful Expression. It works great with Heavy Rain and Remnant. For example, any overkill damage dealt to enemies will increase the already massive damage dealt by a Remnant orb. And any of the Free Radical's homing projectiles that ricochet from the Indiscriminate skill will straight up murder your opponents. This build needs a reliable and powerful damage dealer, and the Free Radical fills that role admirably. I'm also using the 300% weapon damage anoint to push this thing's already immense power to an even more devastating level. The Plasma Coil. This little beauty is the second best weapon for this build, and one of the go-to weapons I switch to both because it's fun to use and incredibly powerful. The plasma coil serves as another great weapon locked to the shock elemental, with the added bonus of also always having radiation as a secondary fire mode. I really tried not to use radiation though, as I'm trying to stick with a specific elemental damage type for these elemental themed builds. But when you come up against an enemy that's immune to shock damage, just switch to the secondary mode. You'll have a much better time, and I technically don't consider this cheating, since the plasma coil is technically always a shock weapon in its primary fire mode. The Hell Shock. This is the third and final shock locked weapon I use for this build, and like the plasma coil, it also comes with a mandatory secondary element as its alternate firing mode. Now, the Hell Shock has fallen a bit behind in terms of damage due to power creep, but with this build, it can still serve as a pretty powerful weapon in your arsenal because of all the shock damage you're dealing. In truth, I just wanted to use it because I still have a soft spot for it in my heart, and it's nice to see this thing getting some use. These three weapons are the best shock elemental locked weapons I could find for Lady THOR Amara. Unfortunately, a lot of other shock weapons I used just were not up to snuff in terms of damage output. And I don't want to make this a half-an-hour video going over how stuff like the Kill-O-The-Wisp might be marginally useful in certain situations, so I skipped them. However, I do have a few other weapons I used with shock damage that are quite powerful with this setup. The Kick Charger, shock element variant with the 150/90 anoint, does a pretty good job one-shotting shielded enemies. This one is a little tricky to use because you do have to score a critical hit on enemies before damaging their health, but it is a really good, really fun feeling when you pull it off. I should also mention that indiscriminate ricochet shots deal massive damage in the 100 millions, and any elemental dot will tick for 1 million if it procs. The Light Show is very powerful as well. I'm using the 300% weapon damage after using Face Slam Anoint with this one, and it's right up there with some of the more powerful weapons I've used for this build. The Light Show is an amazing pistol, and quite devastating on its own, but I do think that with this build, a lot of its power comes from the Face Slam Anoint and the Revolter proc. But hey, that's what this build is about. The Flipper with shock as one of its elements works quite well. In general, I've found this thing to be more of a flak or a Moe's weapon, but with the Face Slam Anoint and the Revolter, it gets the job done about as well with Amara as with those other two. The Light Show and the Flipper both make you feel like a goddess of thunder with their high pellet count, so it's like you're casting a lightning spell with multiple lightning bolts. But then there's also the Needle Gun, ×2 variant with 300% damage increase after using Face Slam. And this thing is extremely powerful when it's got all that up and running. The stacking damage, the anointment, the Revolter proc, the Blessed Orb, all put the Needle Gun on the same level as the Free Radical or the Plasma Coil. This thing is not to be underestimated when it's got all that going for it. And that'll wrap it up for this elemental themed video. There were a few others I tried that could somewhat compete for a spot on the list, like the Redistributor, the Bloodstar Beast, and the Rowan's Call. But like I said earlier, I don't want to make this video too long, and those weapons are honestly fine to mention just in passing. If anyone finds a good shock weapon I missed, give it a try and let me know in the comments below. And with that being said, to all the Borderlands 3 fans out there, good luck, Godspeed, and I wish everyone a good day.